The form she had posted was a family background survey, which required parental signatures. While most people usually fill out and sign such forms themselves, Jianru was particularly stubborn about this aspect. The signatures had to be done by the parents themselves. Fortunately, the forms were only due after the military training, so there was no rush. Jianxing decided to get her to sign it after the training. Before night study, Jianxing and Zulu went out for dinner. During the meal, Zulu kept muttering, "Thank heavens, it's almost over." Jianxing said, "But aren't there 3 more days?" "Only the final day is military review, so it's only 2 more days, 2 days. It's so close." Zulu was very excited. "What's so close?" All of a sudden, a person placed a bowl next to Zulu. Jianxing and Zulu both looked over to see Lin Yule. Lin Yule had clearly gotten a lot tanner, which made his teeth look even whiter. He grinned and said, "What a coincidence." Zulu elbowed him contemptuously. "Who allowed you to sit here?" Lin Yule clicked his tongue and said, "Why is there so little love between classmates? Can't you see that there are no other seats available in this small diner?" Zulu rolled her eyes and ignored him. After dinner, as the trio were walking back, they passed by a bubble tea shop. Lin Yule knocked on Zulu's shoulder. "Want some bubble tea?" "It's my treat." Zulu almost fell as she was caught off guard. There were quite a few people on the road at that time. After stumbling a few steps, embarrassed, she turned red, wishing she could strangle Lin Yule on the spot. Lin Yule quickly pleaded for mercy, sprinting towards the tea shop while saying, "Hold on, I'll bring it out for you." "Wait my ass." Zulu snapped back, cussing. Jianxing laughed and asked, "Are we waiting?" Reluctantly, Zulu muttered back, "Yeah, whatever." The bubble tea shop was a little crowded and they likely needed to line up. Originally, Jianxing and Zulu were blocking the way. Seeing that Lin Yule couldn't come out, they decided to stand aside. "Do you want to go over and see?" Probably bored from the waiting, Zulu asked Jianxing, "Let's see what flavors they have." Jianxing agreed. As they were walking towards the store entrance, Jianxing's peripheral vision caught a glimpse of a figure. She paused, turned her head, and saw a few people standing at the entrance of a store not too far away. One of them was Xu Zhengqing. The others were squatting or standing, with some even carelessly sitting on the steps. Only Xu Zhengqing sat on someone's electric scooter parked near the entrance, bending one leg on the stand with another supporting him from the ground. Near his foot on the stand was half-drunk cup of bubble tea, which looked like a simple original flavor bubble tea. He was looking downwards, seemingly engrossed in something. From Jianxing's angle, she could only see the outline of his profile and his bent leg. Suddenly, someone sitting behind him slapped him, causing Xu Zhengqing to look back. This revealed what he was holding: a smartphone. Vaguely, Jianxing heard the person asking Xu Zhengqing, "What are you doing?" "Chatting with some girl." Xu Zhengqing scoffed back, "Get lost." But he didn't deny anything. Briefly, Jianxing moved her gaze away and walked towards the bubble tea shop. Just as she reached, Lin Yule came out. Along with him was a familiar face, Zhang Zi. Zhang Zi had quite a few cups of bubble tea in his hands, clearly not all for himself. Lin Yule and Zhang Zi chatted for a while before approaching. Zulu, growing impatient, casually asked, "What were you guys talking about? I was anxious waiting here." Lin Yule said, "It's men's business, women need not be concerned." At their age, they were still boys and girls, students. Using adult terms felt a bit embarrassing. Zulu blushed, feeling too embarrassed to pick up the bubble tea. She quickly turned around and walked off. Seeing this, Lin Yule turned to Jianxing, saying, "What will you have? You can take it from him." Jianxing glanced at Zhang Zi, who didn't seem to recognize her. He opened the bag and said, "We have a few flavors, pick whichever you like." Lin Yule suggested, "The strawberry one is for Zulu, the pink one." Zhang Zi said, "Mint is also good, the green one." Jianxing looked at the other few cups, which all seemed to be the same color, something like original flavor. Without her saying anything, Zhang Zi continued, "The rest are all original flavor." Jianxing said, "I'll take the original flavor then." Zhang Zi laughed, "You're quite understanding. I was actually keeping the mint flavor for myself." Jianxing also smiled, saying, "Thanks. You're welcome." They didn't have military training in the evening, so they stayed in the classroom to study on their own. They didn't return to the classroom late, but it was not early either. The classroom was almost full, with only a few people squatting or standing by the door, chatting. Class 3 was situated in the middle, with Class 1 at the very front, close to the girls' bathroom, and the boys' bathroom in the opposite direction. Jianxing and Zulu came out from the girls' bathroom and ran into Lin Yule, who was coming back from the boys' bathroom. Lin Yule didn't even go in when he passed by Class 3. When he was face to face with Zulu, he deliberately blocked her, making Zulu blush all over her face and chase after him to hit him. Lin Yule was running while constantly turning back to tease her. Zulu was furious but couldn't catch up, so she could only pull Jianxing towards the classroom, yelling, "I'm gonna throw his books away." Upon hearing this, Lin Yule hastily tried to grab Zulu. The two of them tugged and pulled, backing into Class 1. Fearful of being hurt accidentally, Jianxing could only lean against the wall. Behind her was the window seat of Class 1. As she turned around, she quickly glanced inside, but did not see a familiar face. "Lin Yule?" Zulu yelled, angry at something again. Jianxing followed the sound and looked over, then paused. It was Xu Zhengqing. He was coming from the direction of the boys' bathroom. He was also in a camouflage uniform, but for some reason, on Xu Zhengqing's body, the overly baggy garment seemed to have a touch of fashion. He must have washed his face in passing. His face still had water on it, as well as his hands. He was tall, with big hands and long fingers, just casually shaking as he walked over. Step by step, getting closer and closer. Jianxing stood in place, her body stiffening, finding it more and more difficult to breathe. Only when Xu Zhengqing stopped at the back door of Class 1, a meter away from her, did Jianxing finally breathe a sigh of relief. Jianxing didn't look at him. Her gaze was on his hand. Xu Zhengqing had been watching Lin Yule, but noticing her gaze, he looked over. Jianxing quickly averted her gaze, revealing her flustered reaction. Xu Zhengqing, however, seemed oblivious to her emotional shift, just a bit curious about what was on his hand. He glanced down at his hand, flipping both the palm and the back, but saw nothing. Jianxing saw his movement out of the corner of her eye, thinking that he would just leave it at that. But the next second, Xu Zhengqing took a step towards her and asked quietly, "What's wrong?" Half of Jianxing's body went numb in an instant. She stiffly turned her neck, and due to the height difference between them, Jianxing's gaze immediately landed on Xu Zhengqing's Adam's apple. Water had just slid down from his face to his neck, leaving a wet trace on his throat. It was a summer night, but Jianxing felt like she was burning all over. She hurriedly raised her eyes and unexpectedly met Xu Zhengqing's drooping gaze. Her heart stopped for a moment, as did her breath. Jianxing had always had excellent vision, maintaining at 1.5. But at this moment, it was as if she saw her own face reflected in Xu Zhengqing's black eyes. Xu Zhengqing asked again, "What's wrong?" There was a gentle laugh in his voice, like the wind that had just blown. This time, Jianxing didn't avert her gaze, and after a few seconds, she took out a small packet of tissue from her pocket. "Do you need it?" She handed it to Xu Zhengqing. Xu Zhengqing smiled. "Thank you." He reached out to take it, skillfully tore it open to pull out a piece, and then returned the remaining packet to Jianxing. Just as Jianxing was about to reach out to take it, Xu Zhengqing took it back. Jianxing was taken aback. The next second, she saw Xu Zhengqing wiping the water off the plastic packaging bag with the tissue, then carefully handed it back to her. Without thinking, Jianxing said, "Thank you." Upon hearing her, Xu Zhengqing glanced at her, then chuckled lightly, wiping his hands as he said, "No problem." Jianxing didn't understand the meaning of his laughter, but the brief sound, blending into the wind, still made her cheeks redden, her heart pounding. She held the tissue in her hand, not in a hurry to take her gaze back, because the darkness could hide her lurking unease. Her nervousness was only revealed in the crackling sound made by the plastic packaging of the tissue. On the other side, Zulu had finally caught up with Lin Yule. Although she had chased him angrily all the way, she couldn't really do much once she caught him. Lin Yule apologized to Zulu with a grin on his face. Spotting Xu Zhengqing behind Zulu, he called out, "Hey brother Xu, guess who I just bumped into?" While rolling the tissue paper into a ball, Xu Zhengqing asked absently, "Who?" Lin Yule leaned in with a smile, hugging Xu Zhengqing's shoulder and leaning down, "I just bumped into Senior Zhang Zi." The action of Xu Zhengqing throwing the tissue clearly paused. Lin Yule stared at Xu Zhengqing, his expression hidden. Xu Zhengqing still maintained the action of throwing the paper, turned his head and looked at Lin Yule without expression. Lin Yule didn't dodge, meeting his gaze. After a while, Lin Yule burst into laughter. Jianxing looked over curiously, only seeing that Lin Yule only laughed for a few seconds, as if he quickly realized something was wrong, quickly put away his laughter. At the same time he stopped laughing, he turned to run, but in the middle of his turn, he was pulled back by Xu Zhengqing. Stumbling, Lin Yule fell towards Xu Zhengqing, begging for mercy. Bro, I was wrong. Damn. Brother, I really was wrong. Xu Zhengqing was indifferent. There was even a faint smile on his face. He looked at Zulu and said, "Excuse me for a moment." Then he forcefully pulled the screaming Lin Yule into his class. As there should be quite a lot of Lin Yule's middle school classmates in class 1, seeing Xu Zhengqing doing this, they cooperatively closed the back door. In a few seconds, Jianxing could clearly hear Lin Yule's curses. Damn. Xu Zhengqing, you're too much. Which way are you reaching? Ah, Daddy, I was wrong. Damn. Who's stripping me? Standing outside, Jianxing couldn't help but laugh when she heard this. Laughing, she said to Zulu, "We should leave first." But Zulu didn't move. Jianxing asked, "What's wrong?" Zulu's expression was unnatural and her face was red. With her eyes fluttering, she asked Jianxing, "Why did Xu Zhengqing say excuse me for a moment to me?" Jianxing chuckled and said while walking towards their class, "I don't know, maybe because you two seem close." Zulu muttered, "Who's close with him?" Jianxing laughed but didn't say anything more. The weather was still unbelievably hot in the following days, but as Zulu had said, the 2 days passed quickly and the military review ceremony ended smoothly at noon. That Sunday, there were no classes in the afternoon, and everyone basically went home. Jianxing rejected Zulu's invitation for lunch and braved the sweat to walk home. By the time she got home, the back of her shirt was mostly wet. "You're back. Are you not going this afternoon? I saw that some students from number 2 middle school are not going." Jianru saw her and asked. Jianxing's family had moved to He County when Jianxing was in grade 6. Jianru and Levicheng, lacking in education and family connections, could only make a living by doing small businesses. During holiday periods, Jianru and Levicheng would sell snacks on the snack street in He County's busiest cultural park. Once school started, they would sell at the gate of number 2 middle school. Because students at number 2 middle school had a high spending power. "Yeah, I'm not going." Jianxing wiped her forehead and her voice was a little weak. "I'm gonna take a shower first." Jianru asked her what she wanted for lunch. Jianxing replied, "Anything is fine." After showering and coming out, her grandmother waved her over. "Come on, get a few bites of watermelon." He County is known for its watermelon, which is very cheap. Jianru loves this and there is almost always watermelon at home in the summer. Jianxing sat down and ate a piece, waiting for her heartbeat to settle down before she sighed in relief. Her grandmother looked at Jianxing with sympathy and said, "Just look at you, your face and neck are different colors from the sun." Jianxing said, "It's okay, I'll get it back in one winter." "How about it? Is high school fun?" the grandmother asked out of curiosity. Her grandmother had been curious for the past few days, but Jianxing always returned so late from the evening self-study that her grandmother was usually asleep. Jianxing was about to talk about the military training when Jianru walked in holding the bowl of vegetables, placed it on the table and said, "What fun, is high school meant for play? If you don't get into university, it'll be enough for you to play for the rest of your life." Her grandmother said, "It's not that severe, you didn't get into university either, and I didn't see you playing for half of your life." "Are you joking? Me going to university? How long did I go to school?" Jianru said while setting out the chopsticks. "My mom didn't move from place to place because of me." At this point, Levicheng came out of the inner room, and Jianru continued, "And my dad didn't lose his job because of me." Hearing this, Jianxing's hand gripping her chopsticks tightened, and she immediately lost her appetite. The initially fresh and sweet taste of watermelon in her mouth began to taste bitter, making her dizzy and seeming to cause a buzzing in her ears. Suddenly, with a snap, she regained her senses, but her wrist lost strength due to the pain, and the chopsticks fell on the table. Before she had time to look up, she heard Jianru yelling, "If you don't want to eat, then don't eat. Who are you pointing at with chopsticks in the air? Are you not happy with me saying a few words? Am I wrong? Isn't the whole family doing everything for you, who would be willing to sweat and grovel here?" Her ears started to buzz again. Her vision also started to black out. Her heart was accelerating, and layer after layer of sweat rose on her back. The whole body was consumed by heat. The shower she had just taken was wasted. Won't you eat or get out? This is usually Jianru's last curse. Generally, it's not necessary to say or do anything, just quietly eat, and the matter would pass. But Jianxing really couldn't eat today. She picked up her chopsticks and bowl, got up, and without saying a word, walked to the kitchen. Her grandmother sighed and scolded Jianru. Are you annoying? Why can't you let people eat a peaceful meal after working hard all morning? The grandmother was about to get up, but Jianru slammed the table. I'll see who dares to let her come back. Not eating? If she has the guts, she won't eat anything from me again. Don't we know who's the boss in this house? Bie Cheng was hesitating about whether to say something, but he closed his mouth immediately when he heard this. When Jian Guxing discarded his wife and daughter, people pointed fingers at Jianru as she grew up. People who grow up in such an environment are usually at two extremes. Either they are timid and weak, or they are strong and domineering, and Jianru was clearly the latter. She was very determined. Even in that era, she dared not to marry. Later, because the family lacked a man and some things were really inconvenient, she brought in a husband. Back in their hometown, Bie Cheng used to transport goods for people and earned a bit of money, which gave him some say in the house. Then in the summer of the year when Jianxing was promoted from the 5th to the 6th grade, Bie Cheng accidentally injured his leg while buying a reward for Jianxing's first place in the final exam, lost his job. In the same year, when they moved to He County, he could only help Jianru sell snacks. So Jianru was in charge of the Jian family. The grandmother was old, an old woman who didn't do anything normally and had to move with them when they moved, which was a nuisance and of no use. She was even less than Bie Cheng, even less in a position to say anything. She could only pull the mother's style and say a few words. How old is she? You weren't as well behaved when you were her age. Jianru scoffed and said, Your granddaughter is impressive. Haven't you ever heard of dogs that bite don't bark? Fine, starving her for a meal won't starve her to death. Eat. Dogs that bite don't bark, Lin Yule said nonchalantly. You know our class teacher talks nicely unusual, but he is actually quite cruel. How do you know? His desk mate, Fang Zhen asked. Lin Yule leaned against the wall, turning the pen in his hand, a mysterious expression on his face, you guess. Fang Zhen cursed him. Are you a dog? Zulu, who had been listening all along, couldn't help but snort when she didn't hear the key content. Don't insult dogs. Lin Yule didn't mind and bared his teeth. Woof. Zulu had never met such a shameless person. After holding it in for a while, the only thing she could hold back was a single sentence, no words. Jianxing couldn't help but laugh. Zulu's face reddened slightly. What are you laughing at? Jianxing said, I'm laughing because you don't even know how to curse people. Zulu paused, her face inexplicably reddening more. She looked at Jianxing, then buried her head in her book, and then after a few seconds, looked at Jianxing again. Her movement was not completely innocent, and even a bit sneaky. Jianxing felt it, but didn't turn her head to ask. After a long while, a notebook was pushed over from the side. Jianxing looked up and saw a row of small characters on it. What should I say when I want to swear? Jianxing found it funny. She wanted to turn around and talk to Zulu directly, but when she turned around, she saw that Zulu was seriously reading a book, showing no intention of dealing with her, so she had to write it on the notebook. Do not curse. This kind of behavior will be called a rice bucket. Rice bucket? This time Zulu turned her head, her eyes showing genuine confusion. Jianxing laughed again. She moved closer to Zulu, covered her mouth and whispered, up and down together. After Zulu figured it out, she took a deep look at Jianxing again. Jianxing didn't notice this time because she caught a thin, tall figure walking past the front door from the corner of her eye. Looking up, she saw it was Xu Zhengqing. There was another person standing next to Xu Zhengqing. Since it was in her blind spot, Jianxing didn't see his face, only saw half of his shoulder. But even so, she recognized him at a glance. It was Xu Zhengqing. In a little while, Xu Zhengqing turned around, and Jianxing saw the stack of papers in Xu Zhengqing's hand. Xu Zhengqing said with dislike, Could you get some post-it notes? Xu Zhengqing seemed helpless. Why all the unnecessary? You don't know old man's pleasure, Xu Zhengqing said. Take it back and rewrite it. What was he writing? Before Jianxing could figure out, she saw Xu Zhengqing come in. She glanced at the door again and found that Xu Zhengqing didn't leave immediately, but took out the top chapter of the papers in his hand, and after a few seconds, folded a paper airplane. Like a child, he first breathed onto the airplane, then threw it out. There was still wind in the evening. The young man's hair was lifted, revealing a clean and handsome face. The light in the classroom shone on the corridor, thinly outlining the side profile of his face. The teenager was at the peak of his exuberance, looking up to the sky, and there were stars when he looked up. Jianxing watched as a wave of indescribable emotions suddenly welled up in her heart. 2 years ago, she had vowed to strive to run by his side no matter how big the gap between their schools and no. 3 middle school was. It was only when she got closer that she finally understood that the distance between Xu Zhengqing and her was not just from Class A to Class C. There was a gap as wide as the stars and ruins between them. With a blink, the young man turned around and his upright figure disappeared at the door. Jianxing gently closed her eyes and withdrew her gaze. On the stage, Xu Changlin summoned Chen Shi to copy the semester's timetable. After Chen Shi finished, Xu Changlin said, "This timetable is just temporary. The final version will be determined this weekend. You can take a look at it first." A few voices sporadically responded, "Okay." Xu Changlin isn't formalistic and doesn't feel offended, he continued. "Everyone put down your books and pens, look up at me, look at this handsome face of mine." There was laughter from below. Chen Shi couldn't help himself, such a big face. Xu Changlin laughed and said, "Not bad. It's probably not as big as yours." Chen Shi's face is really big. In just a week, he has already been nicknamed Chen Dalian Big Face Chen. The laughter is even louder. Chen Shi, a big man, was laughed at until his ears turned red. In the end, he had no choice but to put his hands together in a pleading manner. After everyone had laughed enough, Xu Changlin said, "There's nothing much to talk about. After classes start tomorrow, you guys probably won't have time to chat with me leisurely. If you want to chat, we'll do it in the black room after the exams and when you've got your score reports." Below was a chorus. "Oh, don't groan, I'm just telling the truth," Xu Changlin said. "Have you paid attention to this year's college entrance examination cutoff scores? Don't think you have a lot of time, 3 years go by quickly. Today we talk about 2 things. The first one is about the cutoff scores. You will each write a target score later, not your college entrance exam score, but next year's college entrance exam score. When the time comes, we'll use your final exam scores to measure. After you write it, give it to Chen Shi, and Chen Shi will give it to me. Oh, use post-it notes. Don't just rip a big piece of white paper. Who are you trying to fool?" Xu Changlin added. "What's wrong with white paper? Why are you looking down on white paper now?" someone said. "I just looked down on it." Xu Changlin has an inexplicable tone of pride, which makes everyone laugh incessantly. "Xu Changlin, the second thing is something you all care about, the division of humanities and sciences. We normally start the division in the second semester of the first year. This mainly depends on personal choice. But I still want to say a few words. No matter what you choose later, this semester, treat all equally. If anyone slacks off, we'll have a chat in the black room, understand? I'm going to focus on history. I'm going to focus on history. Lin Yule did it on purpose." Even though Xu Changlin is the class teacher, his subject is not language, math, or foreign, but history. With this comment, if Class 3 is divided according to arts and sciences, it will become humanities class. After Lin Yule finished, other people followed suit. Yes, focus on history." Xu Changlin laughed for a while before saying, "Lin Yule, you're not first in history in the monthly exam. Prepare to come to the black room." Lin Yule was dumbfounded. He has been known for his lopsided results from junior high school, with 8 subjects being excellent out of the 9 major subjects, with only history depending on luck to pass. "I was wrong, big brother. I was really wrong," Lin Yule cried out. "I will definitely serve you like an ox and a horse in the future." Xu Changlin said, "No need, my family doesn't have land. If I bring you back, I have to feed you." The audience laughed out loud. But jokes apart, serious things still need to be done. The college entrance examination is different from the middle school entrance examination. No one here has experienced the college entrance examination, so everything about the college entrance examination is unknown to everyone. Because it's unknown, it's frightening. There's no break during evening self-study. If you want to go to the restroom, you can just go. There's no teacher in the classroom, so there's no need to greet anyone. Jianxing sat in her seat, one hand holding a pen and the other subconsciously curling the corner of the book, as if she was studying earnestly, but the figure of the teenager throwing the paper airplane amidst the intermingling of light and shadow played in her mind. The paper airplane fell into the school square, probably only to be treated as trash. Maybe people would even step on it. Nobody would know that maybe hidden inside was a passionate teenager's dream. nor would they know that the thin, light sheet of paper for her could represent an entire adolescent dream. Her intersection with him was already scarce. How could she bear to give up this unique possession? With such thoughts, Jianxing suddenly put down her pen. Her eyes instantly focused, and she chanced upon the inadvertently crumpled corner of the book, like the traces of her tangled and struggling heart. She pursed her lips and stared at it for a few seconds, then stood up. Su Lu next to her blinked in surprise. "Are you going out?" "Going to the restroom?" Jianxing gave an unclear response and quickly left the classroom. She initially walked, but as she turned the corner of the staircase, she suddenly started running. The evening wind was fresher and cooler than that of the day, blowing on her face comfortingly. At first, Jianxing took one step at a time on the stairs, but then she began to take 2 or 3 steps at once. Her heartbeat followed suit, gradually giving rise to a feeling of nervousness and faint excitement. Under the dim moonlight, the vast school square resembled a tranquil and wide sea. Jianxing felt like a fish, searching for the solitary white that could reflect light in the waves. The square was just too big. Jianxing had probably searched for a while. The excitement in her emotions gradually faded, and in its place welled up a slight impatience. She also began to feel hotter. Jianxing took 2 steps and suddenly thought of something and abruptly lifted her head in the direction of the classroom. She remembered Xu Zhengqing's movements, but she didn't know the direction of the wind. She didn't know where to go, and where she should go. The calm sea suddenly set off waves. Disappointed emotions were like a tsunami. Clouds moved overhead without her knowing when they came, covering the only moon. Jianxing stood in place, suddenly feeling a bit at a loss. She, half leaning her head back, could not see the starry sky or the light. When the school bell rang at night, Jianxing didn't hurry to pack up. Instead, she went to the restroom first. Zulu accompanied her, casually remarking, "Didn't you just go to the restroom a while ago?" Jianxing paused in washing her hands and vaguely responded, "Drank too much water." Zulu didn't pay much attention to this. She sighed with disappointment. "I don't even know where to fill in for the school. In all my years, I only know Tsinghua and Peking University." "Try the national university rankings," Jianxing suggested. "Eh? Can I?" Zulu got excited, then immediately fell back into disappointment. "But we don't know the rankings." "How about going to the used book stands to see if there are any guides for the previous year's students?" Jianxing suggested. Zulu's eyes lit up. "Is that possible? Can we do that?" Jianxing responded, "There should be. I'll check it out on my way home." There were 2 exits at the entrance of the school. There were many bookstores near the main entrance, but there was nothing near the small entrance. Zulu, who had to take the small entrance to get home, could only ask Jianxing, "If you find it, just buy a copy." "I won't go." "Bring it tomorrow and we'll split the cost." "No need. Used books are generally cheap, costing 2 or 3 yuan. Jianxing said, "I'll just buy a copy. We can read it together." "Wow, thank you." Zulu thanked her. Jianxing smiled and said it was no bother. On the way home, Jianxing initially wanted to go directly to the used book stand. As she was about to leave the teaching building, she saw several people walking in the opposite direction, discussing some new books that had just arrived at Xinhua bookstore. Jianxing thought for a moment and decided to follow them to the bookstore that was about 100 square meters in size. The bookstore was indeed stocked with new books, so much so that they hadn't even had a chance to put them all on the shelves yet. Several large boxes were sitting by the side. There were only a few people in the store and the several boxes didn't feel crowded. The scene was full of life. Feeling that she still had time, Jianxing decided to browse around. The bookstore didn't eschew romance novels just because it was located on a high school campus. There were just comparatively fewer of them. The several people who had come over at the same time directly headed to the novel section, but Jianxing wasn't interested in this, so she lingered in the foreign literature section. She casually flipped through a few well-known novels. There were many different handwritten annotations inside the sample books. It was a special tradition of the bookstore. Sometimes reading the annotations could be even more interesting than reading the books because people would have all sorts of strange conversations below the annotations. For example, this one. In black ink it was written, "Please have the courage within your means." In red ink, the reply was, "So do you want to date me?" Jianxing laughed and put the book back in its original place. It was about time for her to leave. Jianxing was careful about the time as Jianru had been ignoring her these past few days. Jianxing quickly made a round trip. As she was about to leave, she passed by the counter and suddenly remembered the college admission guide, so she stopped in her tracks. There was a man inside the counter. The chair leaned back at a high angle. He lay lazily in it, his face shielded by a hat. Jianxing hesitated for a moment, then walked over and tapped on the counter, asking, "Hello?" The man in the counter moved his legs and slowly took off his hat. Only when he took it off did Jianxing realize that this man actually had long hair. It wasn't especially long, shaved on both sides but quite long on the top, tied into a short ponytail. It appeared that he was disturbed from his nap. His face was visibly displeased. He grumbled, "What's up?" Although Jianxing felt sorry, she had already woken him up, so she asked, "Do you have an admission guide?" "Admission guide?" The man looked her up and down. "For senior students?" "No," Jianxing said, "for freshmen." "Oh, why would freshmen need that? Are you trying to burden your long high school life in advance?" This man seemed a bit absurd. Jianxing, not being able to help herself, looked around uncertainly for a moment, starting to doubt whether this man really worked at the bookstore or not. But despite his plethora of words, he still bent down to dig out a book from somewhere, still in his lazy disposition, and threw it directly onto the counter. "Register on the side. Remember to return it on time." Jianxing said, "Oh, okay." As she flipped open the registry, she noticed that most of the names belonged to sophomore students. After registering briefly, Jianxing couldn't resist flipping forward a few pages. Suddenly, she spotted a familiar handwriting in regular script. Name, Xu Zhengqing. Class, Senior Year 11. Book, 1984. Checkout date, August 23, 2009. Return date, August 31, 2009. Today. Jianxing paused and put down the registry and pen. Her hands were somewhat trembling, seemingly from excitement, yet she still maintained a casual tone. "Do you have 198 for here?" The not-so-serious man at the counter casually pointed in a direction. Jianxing turned around a bit hastily and walked there in a rush, with her heart suspended in mid-air, in fear that the bookstore only had one copy of 1984 and that it might have been borrowed by someone else just a moment ago. She was suddenly in a state of chaos, and it didn't even occur to her to check the registry for any subsequent borrowers of the book. After searching for a bit, she found it in a corner, but it was a sealed copy. Jianxing quickly turned around and walked back to the counter, her voice trembling with barely suppressed stiffness. "Do you have an unsealed copy of 1984? The man at the counter was stunned for a moment and said, "If you unseal it, you'll have one, right?" Jianxing was also stunned. She recalled that one could unseal any book in this bookstore. After a moment's pause, she pressed her lips together. She could unseal it. However, what she wanted was not just the book. "Forget it," Jianxing said in a low voice. "I'm in no hurry to read it." She thought about leaving, but upon recalling the return date noted in the registry, she reluctantly asked, "Do I have to return this book on time?" The man at the counter glanced at her normally. "Yes." "Oh," Jianxing asked again, "do I have to register again when I return it?" "No need, just tick the box beside the return date," he replied. Only then did Jianxing recall that there was a spot for ticking on the registry, but she hadn't paid attention to whether Xu Zhengqing had ticked his off. Jianxing hesitated for a moment, then boldly opened the registry again in front of the man at the counter. Indeed, there was no tick. He hadn't returned it yet. Jianxing quietly breathed a sigh of relief. Even the action of closing the registry was much lighter. Only after Jianxing left did the man slowly take his gaze back. He adjusted the registry and casually flipped it over. The latest registrant was Jianxing from Senior Year 13. Casually, he turned another page and glanced at a random entry, lifting his eyebrows slightly. Jianxing forgot to bring the college entrance guidebook home and returned to class first. At this time, there was no one in the classroom, the lights were off, and the doors were locked. In the dark, Jianxing pushed the window open and tossed the guidebook onto Lin Yule's desk. As she was about to close the window, she noticed a large shadow descending upon her from behind, accompanied by a streak of faint illumination. She jumped in fright and let out a soft cry. Her yell seemed to startle the other party as well. Jianxing faintly heard a curse muttered. Startled, she looked over incredulously. The figure was indeed large, towering above her. The glow in mid-air was created by a mobile phone screen illuminating his features. It wasn't until Jianxing saw him clearly that she confirmed it was Xu Zhengqing. She thought she must have misheard. Composing herself and recalling her sharp scream, she wanted to find a hole and burrow into it. She counted herself lucky that the whole floor was in darkness, hoping that Xu Zhengqing wouldn't recognize her. But regrettably, he had a mobile phone. Xu Zhengqing must have been greatly startled too. He shone his phone light on Jianxing's face, and upon recognizing her, he seemed surprised. Jianxing. Although surprised, his voice remained composed and quiet, lacking any hostility. Upon hearing her name, Jianxing blushed even amidst the darkness. Her heartbeat accelerated abnormally. Despite the draft swirling around the room, she felt so anxious it was as if she could hardly breathe. She pressed her hand against the window ledge at her back, the rough cement wall scraping her fingertips till it ached faintly. Yet she could only feel the warmth that followed the discomfort. The heat rolled up her body until it reached her throat, causing an involuntary swallow. She managed to get out. It's me. Xu Zhengqing only shined his phone light on Jianxing once, then, sensing it was slightly impolite, he turned it away. Placing his phone back in his pocket, he saw Jianxing standing by the window and asked in confusion, "Why are you still here? Is something wrong?" Jianxing quickly replied, "Just dropping something off." Oh, Xu Zhengqing didn't ask any more questions, perhaps not interested, but looked outside and asked, "Aren't you leaving?" Jianxing's heart rate reached its peak at this second. She always thought herself quite casual, even crude as her grandma would say, but in front of Xu Zhengqing, even the pitch and tone of her voice was different. She tried hard to keep her voice normal and calm, saying, "Yes, I'm about to go." "Well, let's go together then." Xu Zhengqing reached for his phone again. The phone light was weak, even weaker than the moonlight overhead, but when Xu Zhengqing shone it in front Jianxing, her disoriented and clueless heart suddenly welled up. The light was lent to her by Xu Zhengqing, and she didn't want to give it back, even if there would be no more tender moonlight in her lifetime. "Did I frighten you just now?" All of a sudden, Xu Zhengqing broke the silence in the corridor. "No, I think I scared you," Jianxing said, feeling embarrassed as she recalled the earlier scene. Despite the dark corridor, she couldn't bring herself to look at him. Instead, she kept her head low, her cheeks flaming. Xu Zhengqing chuckled and casually replied, "Then we're even." His words carried an easy, familiar fondness. Jianxing couldn't quite pin down how she felt, only that she seemed to be floating, her lips instinctively curving upward. She hummed in agreement. The hallway was empty, except for the two of them. Their footfalls echoed, sometimes louder, sometimes softer, reverberating around them. Because of the echoes, every conversation they had seemed to be repeated many times. Jianxing found everything magical, the events of today, and even every day since she entered this school. All this was because of the man by her side. Unable to resist, Jianxing slowed her pace to walk behind Xu Zhengqing. They differed in height, but by using the aid of the stairs, she almost matched Xu Zhengqing's height. She could not see anything clearly in the darkness, yet was unwilling to avert her eyes. She really liked him. But in this school, who knows how many people are just like her, fond of him. However, because he is so outstanding, liking him has become something ordinary. As she thought about this, Jianxing lowered her gaze. Accidentally, she saw that Xu Zhengqing was holding a book in his hand with the help of the dim light. Before she could ask him, they had already exited the school building. "I'm going to the bookstore to return a book." "You go ahead." Xu Zhengqing was the first to speak up. "All right," Jianxing responded quickly. With that, Xu Zhengqing casually waved the book at Jianxing, saying goodbye. Jianxing wanted to smile at him, but Xu Zhengqing turned around the next second. Jianxing's half-formed smile froze on her face, and then in a small voice she said, "Good night." As Xu Zhengqing walked away, he checked the time on his phone. It was after PM. He wasn't sure if the bookstore would still be open, so he quickened his pace. Seeing a faint light emanating from the direction of the bookstore, he slowed down. The shutters at the front of the store were halfway down. Xu Zhengqing pushed the glass door open and went in. Seeing a lady at the counter busy tidying up, he walked up to her, greeted her and said, "Hello, I'm here to return a book." Not wanting to disturb her, he nimbly opened the register, turned a page, found his name, and marked it. He placed the book on the counter. Since it was late, he didn't linger and left. As he was walking out the door, he saw Zhang Bishan out of the corner of his eye, his unique hairstyle making Xu Zhengqing laugh. "Did you just come back like this? Didn't Grandpa Zhang disassemble you?" Just as Xu Zhengqing finished his sentence, a lady's voice was heard from the bookstore. "Bishan, stop smoking so much." Zhang Bishan turned his head, a cigarette between his lips, and responded in a muffled voice, "Got it." Xu Zhengqing gave Zhang Bishan a thumbs up as he withdrew his gaze. Zhang Bishan chuckled. "What are you pretending for?" He reached down to pick up a cigarette box and threw it into Xu Zhengqing's arms. Xu Zhengqing caught it and laughed. "No, I'm going home soon." "Oh," Zhang Bishan did not even look at him. "Get out of here." Xu Zhengqing's and Zhang Bishan's grandfathers were old friends, and the two of them grew up together. Zhang Bishan is 6 years older than Xu Zhengqing. Under normal circumstances, there should be a generational gap between them, making it impossible for them to be friends. But perhaps because Xu Zhengqing was more mature than his peers and Zhang Bishan was quite the opposite, they became quite the unlikely pair of sworn friends. "Did you end up in trouble this time because of university?" In the corridor, Xu Zhengqing asked suddenly. "It's adult stuff." "You kid, shouldn't worry about it," Zhang Bishan replied. "Go do your homework." "Huh?" Xu Zhengqing scoffed. "I'm not really interested in dealing with a dropout like you." Zhang Bishan squinted his eyes at him. Laughing, Xu Zhengqing asked, "Are you really going to drop out of school?" Zhang Bishan grunted. "Yeah, my old man told me to stay at home for a year." "Why don't you go home then?" "What is home?" "This here is my home," Zhang Bishan replied. "In the future, I'll be working part-time here. Come earlier for book returns next time." "Got that?" Xu Zhengqing smirked at him. "That book was a loan from my uncle." "Why don't you chastise him? You know we're not allowed to pull strings at school." "Call him Teacher Zhu Changlin." Xu Zhengqing rolled his eyes, rose from his seat and left. Watching the young man's retreating figure, which seemed increasingly tall, Zhang Bishan flicked the ash off the cigarette and called out, "Zhu." Xu Zhengqing turned around reluctantly. Zhang Bishan thoroughly enjoyed seeing Zhao Zhu in this state. He took a drag from his cigarette, then asked after a long chuckle, "You borrowed the book for your uncle. Didn't you even take a look at it yourself?" "No time." Having said this, Xu Zhengqing waved his hand dismissively and walked off. The Qi High School wasn't just a place of excellent educational resources, but also had a humanized equipment system. For example, there was an LED light shining 24 hours a day at the school gate, showing Beijing time. At that moment, it was August 31st, 2009, 10:22 p.m. Approaching midnight, the wind began to carry a tinge of chill. Jian Xing was squatting next to the flower bed at the entrance of the building, repeatedly plucking at the nearby grass, occasionally craning her neck to look in the direction of the bookstore. After countless quick glances, Jian Xing finally saw the familiar figure. Under the orderly array of street lamps, his shadow stretched long. Occasionally, under the lights, you can see the handsome face of the boy, and occasionally walking into the dark gaps between the lamps, he seems a bit aloof. Yet these oscillations between light and dark seemed to Jian Xing as if she was watching a silent movie. The warm yellow light painstakingly outlined his 15-year-old gentleness and loneliness. He came step by step, walking into the light. He had never lacked an audience, but at that moment it seemed as if between heaven and earth, she was his only admirer. Jian Xing figured she might be short on time, so she just quickly glanced at Xu Zhengqing leaving the campus before racing towards the bookstore. The wind carried the scent of earth, but most prominently, the smell of ink. It seemed to be a smell unique to every school. The scent becomes more potent when you run at night. Jian Xing knew she could take her time. Even if she had to borrow it the next day, it was just a book after all, and it's not like it was going to be particularly in demand. But what if? If she were to miss it, she would probably regret it for the rest of her life. She didn't have to stubbornly read that specific book. She just wanted to hold on to this magical day. It would be best to end it with a perfect full stop.